Hello and welcome back, guys. I have some news that may be fortunate or unfortunate, depending on the person. And that news is that the match 2 and 3 that I recorded yesterday, sadly, the audio is all kinds of messed up. I don't really know what happened, but my words are getting cut off as I'm saying them, and only part of the audio is going through. I suspect it had something to do with my microphone's volume. Maybe it auto-adjusted after a Zoom meeting or something for my grad school classes. But regardless, whatever the cause of the problem is, the result is that we're going to have to go through these matches play by play, which is really not my preference, especially for a list like this where everything's very unique and I think it's much more fun to watch in the moment. But regardless, I've already got match 1 of this league posted on YouTube. It will have been posted yesterday. This is the day after. I usually am ahead in my recording schedule, but things kind of fell behind, so I still wanted to get this content out there. Also, I must say that this particular deck list has been very exciting to me, so hopefully you guys share that excitement, and hopefully this format of video doesn't bother you too much. But we are going through match 2 today with the list that you see on screen. After a solid victory in round 1, we're headed into what can hopefully be a 2-0 start. And of course, at this point in time, I already know the outcome, so I will try not to spoil anything for this match and the next one. And hopefully by the 4th match, we'll be back to live gameplay rather than a voiceover style gameplay. And yeah. Anyways, I will see you guys in the match. Alright, so I have the match pulled up in front of me. Before we get started, I want to say, if you are at all confused by the deck list that you saw on screen just a moment ago, and you do not know what's going on and what the cards are that we're playing and how we got to this list, then check out match 1. I go into detail about the deck list and the choices that were made and some of the concessions that were made as well in the building of this particular list. But regardless, we are here for match 1 against Ultranax. So obviously we are lucky enough to be on the play, which is always welcome here. And we are greeted with the following hand. We have 2 threats, including a Karn that we can play on turn 3. We have a Arboreal Grazer, but the problem is we actually can't play Karn on turn 3, or even our Arboreal Grazer before turn 3, because of the fact that we are lacking in green sources. If one of these lands here were an into the battlefield untapped green land, such as a Turn Timber Symbiosis, or a Basic Forest, or even a One-Step Teeth, or whatever, then I think this hand would probably be a Snapkeep, but unfortunately that is not present for this hand, and being on the play and being able to be a little more aggressive, pushing for more of an advantage, we decide to mulligan this one. And we are greeted with the following hand. So this hand is similar to the last hand, except that we don't have any ramp sources, but we do have an untapped green source. We have a turn 3 Dryad into bounce land if we draw it, and if we draw an Amulet, we can still turn 3 a Karn. If we draw a Grazer, we can do it. If we draw an Azusa or a Dryad, then we can potentially just Regisaur Titan. So this hand is not to my liking, but I think it's better necessarily than mulliganing to 5, so we do choose to keep here. And we bottom the Hanweir Battlements, as we already have an untapped source in the Plains and also in the Turn Timber Symbiosis as well, so keeping access to Valakut will be better along the line if we end up getting a Dryad on the battlefield. So, and Hanweir is better in our deck anyways, let's be honest. We, of course, lead on tapped Symbiosis Go, so that we can play our Arboreal Grazer if we happen to draw it. And our opponent plays tapped a Nurturing Peatland and taps it, paying 1 life for a black mana. And turn 1, Thoughtseize. Of course, the classic and modern. They choose to take the Karn, which makes a lot of sense. It's the threat that we can get to most easily. See a couple Mishra's Baubles going through. And we draw a land, which is not fantastic. Again, we're kind of looking for ramp sources here, so we'll just have to see how this plays out. It's looking pretty bad for us. But regardless, we'll play out our Valakut tapped, as it is a tap source, and we'd rather go ahead and get one of those out of the way. We can always shock in the Temple Garden if we have to. Our opponent fetches and plays a Dark Confidant, so they're on some kind of black-green grindy deck. The presence of Mishra's Bauble either indicates perhaps Shadow, but they did not fetch Shock, so this play pattern kind of rules that out. Meaning the other likelihood is that Bobble is played in this deck as a way to bump up Tarmogoyf, make it a beefier boy, maybe even perhaps enable Delirium, but generally you would expect to see Mishra's Bobble out of a strictly green-black mid-range deck, so we can be pretty certain at this point that we're playing against The Rock. And if you're not familiar with The Rock, it is a green-black and mid-range deck based around discard and Tarmogoyf and Liliana. It originally came from a deck called The Rock and his minions. I don't know all of the history behind it, but the name has stuck for me at the very least, so that's what I'm calling it. But if you're not familiar with that name, you might as well just consider it black-green mid-range. Here we top deck another land, of course. We play our tapped Temple Garden and pass it back, really sorely needing any kind of action here. Our opponent plays a land, a Liliana, and the punches keep coming, so we're going to pitch a land here, and we decide to pitch the Plains, as green sources are generally more valuable, especially for hitting eventual Turn Timber Symbiosis mana, so we can cast the front side of this card with a triple green pip, so we already have a white source here anyway, so we don't really need the Plains. They're going to clock us for 2, of course, with Mr. Bob Mayer, and we top deck Amulet of Vigor, which is a very interesting one. We can play Forest Amulet and have Gruul Turf plus Titan this upcoming turn. However, our opponent, we know, has an active Liliana plus, so that would make us discard one of these 2 cards and potentially leave us without Titan mana or without a threat. That would be fine if we were to top deck a Bounce Land or a Garenbrig off the top. We could just pitch Gruul Turf and hope to slam a Titan, but I choose to go with the more conservative route here, and I play the Bounce Land out, picking up the Temple Garden. Not picking up Turn Timber Symbiosis, because we don't want to expose our potential land drop to a discard spell here. And our plan here is to just discard the Amulet to the Liliana. Our opponent plays Ghost Quarter, which is unfortunate, because it's going to put us even further away from Titan mana. This game is looking really bad. Our opponent deploys yet another Dark Confidant, and in our draw step, they Ghost Quarter away our Bounce Land as suggested before, and put us down to 3 mana in play. We're able to play out a land here, and it is going to be the Temple Garden again to not lose any life points here. If we top deck a Garenbrig, we can slam a Titan this upcoming turn and win that way before our opponent gets a chance to Liliana ult us. And that's about our only hope here, really. We see a Lily uptick, of course, and we discard a Forest, as our Crumbling Vestige could represent a differently colored mana for potentially Tolaria West or something along those lines. Even if we had to copy it with a Vesuva or something, it's very minimal upside here. Our opponent plays a Spell Bomb and a third Dark Confidant. So they bash with the crew, pass it back. We top deck a Bounce Land. Okay, so that gives us an additional card, an additional turn to potentially resolve a Titan here. We're going to pick up our Turn Timber Symbiosis here and pass it back. Our opponent flips a couple cards to their Dark Confidant, putting them down to 7. So we could potentially also win by our opponent losing their own life total due to their Dark Confidants. We are on a 2-turn clock here, so there's that. Our opponent goes for the uptick on the Liliana as well, instead of just -6ing, so that gives us even more potential to just do what we want to do this upcoming turn. So I don't know why they wouldn't just ult us here, but it's whatever. We discard the Turn Timber, as we don't want to be taking 3 damage to make our Titan come into play, as the Titan is supposed to stabilize us against this board of Dark Confidants. They play a Luris, which we don't really care that much about, a Bobble, and they pass it back. Interesting to note that their Luris actually can gain them life to prevent them from killing themselves with Dark Confidant, but we'll see. We untap. We get a Heath in our hand here, and our opponent goes for the Assassin's Trophy on our Selesnya Sanctuary and our draw step. Can't float the mana because it'll drain before we get to our main phase. We search for our basic land, and there's no way to cast Titan here, so our only hope is that our opponent flips 6 points of damage worth of Dark Confidant triggers, So the first one reveals an Assassin's Trophy, second one reveals an Inquisition to Kozilek, and the last one reveals a land, good old trusty Dark Confidant. So that's going to be the end of this match. We just go ahead and scoop it up right there, as this is lethal on board. So now we are moving on to game 2. I will see you guys shortly for the sideboarding. Alright guys, we are back here for the sideboarding for against black-green rock, or black-green midrange. And we bring in these 8 cards and sideboard out these 8 cards here. So I'll start with the outs first. We are cutting Arboreal Grazer here because going a card down just to ramp against an opponent who's trying to slow you down and 1-for-1 you and also has land destruction and things like that, really your cards are more valuable than your speed, and sometimes just getting up to 6 mana and hard casting a Primeval Titan is your route. In fact, in game 1, that's kind of what we were building up to do, and our opponent just happened to have the interaction at the right times in order to keep us off of Titan mana. So Grazer is not really looking to be very impactful here. We also sideboard out 1 Summoner's Pact here to play around the potential for our opponent to have things like Fulminator Mage, and obviously we saw Ghost Quarter, Assassin's Trophy to some extent, although usually Trophy can be played around pretty easily. Regardless, you don't want to be Summoner's Pacting and then losing to your pact trigger. This is just not something that you're really interested in doing. We do keep 1 Summoner's Pact in deck here for the purposes of transmuting with Tolaria West, since our Titan needs to be able to chain into another Titan to make sure that we are able to keep our pressure up. We also board out 1 Amulet, as they are dead top decks going late, and they don't really do a whole lot in multiples in this matchup, because oftentimes you can't deploy a bounce land into your opponent's open Fulminator Mage or Ghost Quarter activation or what have you anyways, so there's really no point in having more than 1 Amulet, and especially in the late game, when you've got 6 or 7 mana's worth of lands in play, and you just want to top deck a Titan, top decking an Amulet of Vigor just is the worst feeling in the world. It's also weak to Kolaghan's Command as well. We haven't seen any red. It is possible that our opponent is playing red and just never drew any of their red cards or never fetched a red source. It's pretty doubtful, so again, we're pretty sure at this point that this is just an opponent playing straight up black-green, but usually that would be a consideration as well, for example, against Jund. So Amulet is definitely one of the weaker cards here. We trim 1 copy of Rule Turf to play around our opponent's potential land destruction spells. Again, against Jund, Cleansing Wildfire would be a consideration, but here it's mainly just Fulminator Mage and Ghost Quarter. Both of those cards are pretty good against bounce lands, so trimming 1 bounce land makes us a little more resilient to those effects. And then finally, we cut 1 Azusa because it is the legendary of the 2 3-drops that we have access to, so having an Azusa in play and an Azusa in hand is like having 1 less card. And that's very niche. It doesn't very often come up. Azusa is generally pretty good, but we needed the space to bring in these 8 cards here. So we bring in Relic of Progenitus to deal with our opponent's Luris loops and to make our opponent's Tarmogoyfs look a little weaker if they're playing them. We haven't seen them yet, but they are most likely playing Tarmogoyf. We bring in an Engineered Explosives. Again, this is going to be a way to deal with things like Tarmogoyf and Dark Confidant. And if we have to put it on 3, then we can blow up things like Liliana of the Veil and Ashiok, Dreamrender, those kinds of things. We bring in 2 copies of Path to Exile, leaving 1 in the board. The reason for this is that Path to Exile is actually generally pretty weak against decks that are very value-oriented, very slow-going. Giving your opponent an additional land can be very devastating. The problem is they do have the card Dark Confidant, and that is one that we most certainly need to answer because we will lose to the card advantage of Dark Confidant going late. The fact is that we can't usually punish them for using their life total in that manner, and their cards are what beat us, not necessarily anything else. So them having access to additional cards via Dark Confidant is why we need Path to Exile to deal with that particular threat. In fact, I wouldn't be opposed to bringing in the 3rd path, but I just didn't feel like there was anything else to cut here. So, and then finally, of course, we bring in all 3 of our Celestial Purges. This one's going to be great at answering Liliana's. Specifically, Liliana of the Veil is the one that we are most interested in answering, but also things like Ashiok, Dark Confidant as well, Purge hits, things like that. So, anyways, that is the sideboarding for this matchup. 8 cards. It's a pretty large amount. Anyways, I will see you guys in Game 2. All right, we are here for game 2, and of course, after losing game 1, we choose to be on the play, so we immediately are greeted with the following hand. Also, immediately after having sideboarded out an Amulet of Vigor, we draw one of the 3 that's still remaining in our deck, and a hand that's heavily reliant on 2 bounce lands. Kind of awkward, but, I mean, when you have access to a turn 2 Dryad on the play, you can't really get rid of that. If our Dryad survives, we have a turn 3 Titan, because we can go turn 1 Cavern, naming something, play Amulet, turn 2 Growth Chamber, pick up the Cavern, play Dryad, turn 3, double Gruul Turf with 6 mana and play Path 4, cast a Titan. That's a little too good to pass up, I must say. So we do go ahead and keep this. Our opponent keeps 7 as well, and of course we lead on Cavern, naming Dryad, and play our Amulet out, and pass it back. And our opponent has, of course, the turn 1 Inquisition, and they take our Dryad, seeing what we're up to here. The beauty of having an Eladamri's Call in this hand is that our opponent can't use their Inquisition to rid us of a Titan here, and if we do happen to be able to cast Eladamri's Call anytime soon, we can also use this to get another 3-drop if we have to without having to tap out the turn after, which is one of the strengths of the card, so doing some work here. They bobble and pass it back to us. Sadly, we don't have any white sources to cast this call just yet, so we're going to play out this relic that we just freshly drew off the top, firing off the relic tap immediately to give our opponent the least number of options going into their turn. We're going to play out one of these bounce lands, picking up our Cavern, of course, trying to make headway on our land drops, and we pass it back to our opponent. They fetch, play a Dark Confidant. What else? This is one of the scarier ones. I would have preferred this to be a Tarmogoyf, not only because we have a Relic of Progenitus in play, but also because Dark Confidant letting them draw cards will help them find their answers and their land destruction effects as well, so not really a great one for us. And, in fact, we're looking for specific cards. We're looking for an Azusa. We're looking for a white source to cast Eladamri's Call. There are things that we're looking for here, and it's not looking like our Relic is going to be doing a whole lot this game. I mean, I know it's kind of early to say that, but regardless, so we go ahead and cycle it. And we pick up a copy of Castle Garenbrig, which is interesting. We have the option of playing the Sanctuary and picking up Gruul Turf so we can call on our opponent's instep, but I think the stronger line is to play out the Garenbrig so we can have a Titan this upcoming turn. Given that our Amulet stays in play, we can play a Growth Chamber and untap it, or a Sanctuary and untap it, and float 4 with the 2 bounce lands we have in play and activate Garenbrig. So we're just going to play our Garenbrig and pass here and hope to fade one more turn here of non-interaction. Our opponent plays a Liliana of the Veil and upticks, and that can only mean one thing. Our Titan is good to go, and we're going to be able to haste our Titan to kill this Liliana as well. So this effectively made our opponent discard a card and spent their whole turn. This is great for us. This is fantastic. So our opponent, of course, swings with their Dark Confidant. We draw a Turn Timber Symbiosis as well. So we're going to go ahead and make our Titan mana, Pact 4, and cast a Primeval Titan. We're going to search for Hanweir and Valakut, of course, and get the haste down. We're going to swing and kill our opponent's Liliana of the Veil, of course. What happened here? I don't recall misclicking in this instance. Oh, okay, I know what this was. I was very confused because I was like, why is the Hanweir tapped? Why did it show a mana? I understand now. Our opponent conceded at the spot. I was like very confused for a second. Yes, we floated the red mana and activated Hanweir right as our opponent hit the concede button because they knew they were losing the Liliana, and we had a Titan in play, and they know we have a backup Eladamri's Call that we can set up by searching for a white source here off of our Titan. So they knew that we just had it all, and yeah, that was game 2. So I will see you guys for game 3. All right, so quickly, before we jump into game 3, there actually is one small sideboard pivot here. I figured that this might be the case, and I double-checked it before I started going through game 3, and I'm glad that I did, because in this case, we brought in the Azusa and sideboarded out the Cavern of Souls. The reason being that having a 3-drop and a way to accelerate into Titan mana ahead of schedule is very important, even if our opponent is able to catch us with 1 Azusa in hand and 1 in play. Being able to get our land drops out that fast so we can just top deck a Titan and win that way, very important. And of course, Cavern of Souls is strictly worse than just a regular basic forest here, so no reason to be including that one in the deck. And that is the only change, so I will see you guys for Game 3. Alright, so here we are for Game 3. I've already accidentally skipped to our opponent's first main phase, but that's fine. We are greeted with the following hand: double Amulet, Dryad, a bounce land, an untapped source on 1. I don't know if you can afford to pass that up. I mean, is it true that this hand will be weak to Ghost Quarter or Assassin Trophy? Most certainly, yes. We could run into a turn 1 discard spell here, taking our Dryad, but even in that case, we would be able to cast a turn 2, or turn 3 perhaps, Titan here. So, turn 2, if we were to draw a copy of Arboreal Grazer or an Azusa, in addition to a Titan, since we are on the draw here. But regardless, this hand just seems a little too juicy to pass up. We also have a natural Bojuka Bog, which could be good or could be bad, depending on what our opponent has going. So, anyways, our opponent leads on Verdant Catacombs, Mishra's Bauble. They bobble... I don't know who, actually. I'm assuming it was me. I'm not sure. They fetch a tapped Overgrown Tomb and pass the turn. So no turn 1 discard spell is fantastic. We draw a land. A Valakut, none other. So if we draw another land, we'll be able to start getting our opponent with Valakut triggers here with our Dryad. But that's a little into the future here, so we're going to go ahead and play our Ghost Quarter and our Amulet on 1 and pass it back, keeping the Crumbling Vestige, so we have the ability to potentially make 3 mana off of it and play around an Assassin's Trophy or a Fulminator Mage or something like that, that will be able to get our mana value out of Crumbling Vestige anyways. So here, we see our opponent play a Dark Confidant off of a Swamp and pass it back to us. We top deck, naturally, another land. So we're going to, of course, deploy our second Amulet, use this turn to cash in our Crumbling Vestige value and make some progress on our land drops, and play Dryad, of course. So we float our green. Here goes the Dryad. We play our Razorverge Thicket that we just freshly drew off the top and pass it back. Our opponent loses some life to their Dark Confidant. They pick up a copy of Hexdrinker here, which is basically just Savannah Lions in this matchup. Not really the strongest threat our opponent could have access to. They play Ghost Quarter, which is quite annoying. And then they tap out to cast a Ashiok. I was really hoping this would be Liliana the Veil, as Ashiok is quite an annoyance. But we do have Dryad plus Valakut to potentially deal with our opponent's Ashiok down the line, assuming our Dryad doesn't die, but that's definitely very problematic. So, of course, our opponent's not going to attack into our Dryad. And we make the God top deck of Karn, the Great Creator. This one does not care about Ashiok whatsoever, so of course... and on top of that, we have the ability to go off with our Sanctuary here, knowing that our opponent tapped their Ghost Quarters. So from our sideboard, of course, we have the option of getting a Wormcoil Engine or a Sky Sovereign if we'd like to. And so that's very easy to do since we have 8 mana in this Sanctuary double Amulet Dryad alone. So 9, 10, 11 mana. It's more than enough to play Karn and some other big card. So, of course, we're going to play out our Sanctuary, float the mana, play our Karn, minus, and search for Sky Sovereign in this case, so we can immediately get this Dark Confidant out of play. If our Karn survives, then we can uptick on Sky Sovereign to clock the Ashiok. And if it doesn't, then any, like, Azusa, Dryad, or even a Titan top deck would allow us to activate Sky Sovereign and clock our Ashiok over there in the air. So Sky Sovereign is the pick here, just to get this Dark Confidant out of play immediately. Again, this is the card that could bury us going long-term, even with a Karn the Great Creator, so we want to cut that off as fast as possible. So here we go. We play our Bojuka Bog because we do have 5 mana without having to play Bounce Land a second time, so we can leave that one in play. Here's the Sky Sovereign and the slaying of a unfortunate Dark Confidant, and clocking Ashiok for 2 with our Dryad. We can also use Valakut here to clear our opponent's Ashiok if our Karn gets answered and we don't have something to crew Sky Sovereign with. So there's that. They Ghost Quarter themselves for a Revolt on a Fatal Push, and they push our Dryad. Fine with me. Hexdrinker, fine with me. Level it up. Also fine with me. That one's just going to die to our Sky Sovereign. So this is pretty much game here. We're going to minus Karn and get a Wormcoil Engine. We're going to cast said Wormcoil Engine and then crew Sky Sovereign with it and attack. This will allow us to get a an additional Sky Sovereign attack trigger here to clear the Hex Drinker and also kill our opponent's Ashiok with the Sky Sovereign's damage itself. So, in fact, there's a decent argument to just go straight for attacking our opponent's face here, but it doesn't matter because once we get the crew on, they know what's about to happen to them, and they also had to put themselves down on land to make the Fatal Push play anyways, so this is just an unbeatable board state for them. We still have a Karn in play that they haven't answered. We have a Sky Sovereign that we can uptick on to clock our opponent while also clearing their board, and we have a Wormcoil Engine that even if they do kill it, we get 2 more tokens out of it, so... Plus, they don't know this, but we do have a backup Path to Exile that we're holding up here as well, so... It's whatever. We just had it all in Game 3 because of the wonderful top deck of Karn. Karn happens to be very good tech against Ashiok, as you might expect, so... Anyways, that was the conclusion of this match. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, despite the fact that it was a sort of a replay here. And if you have any thoughts or concerns or anything else that you would like to be heard, leave it in the comments below. Of course, assuming it's not spam. I've had to delete a few comments that were not appropriate. If you see those, then report them. They do come up every once in a while. I think it's something that happens to all YouTubers at this point. But anyways, leave your wonderful ideas and suggestions in the comments below. Let me know what you think of this list. I will see you guys for the remainder of this league. Again, the next match is going to be just like this one, unfortunately, but hopefully we can get a live 4th and 5th match here and see where we can go from there. So anyways, 2-0, great start. Not gonna jinx anything. I will see you guys in the next match. This is Redface Menace, signing off.